excited to introduce the second panel, or the moderator for 5 generations in the workplace. So we started the conversation a little bit about the role of business and the commercial opportunity related to changing demographics. But what about what the workplace is like as 5 generations vie for opportunities and coexist in the workplace? We have fortunate to have Chris Farrell here as our moderator. Chris is a senior economics contributor at Marketplace, Public Radio's most listened to public radio business and economic program. He's also an economics commentator for Minnesota Public Radio and host of a series, Conversations on the Creative Economy, as well as a columnist for PBS Next Avenue and the Star Tribune. He's the author of 5 books on personal finance and the economy, including most recently, Purpose and a Paycheck, Finding Meaning, Money, and Happiness in the Second Half of Life. Thank you, Chris.
Well, thank you, and honored to be here and very excited about our topic and with this panel, because, one place where the generations really do come together is the workplace. And so a lot of the discussion that we're having, to me, it's sort of the rubber meets the road in the workplace when you're thinking about promotions and pay and opportunity and who gets called into the room when there's a problem and it needs to be solved. And ageism is real. And the survey, the polls that were put up earlier, showed that ageism is real, and we know that. But at the same time, there's this industry that's out there that says you have 5 generations in the workplace, and this is terrible. It's not just a generation gap. It's a war. It's a chasm. And as one place put it, a chasm so deep that it threatens our organization's future. Usually they're saying, hire me, I'm a consultant, and I'm going to solve your problem. But there's also scholarly studies out there that are saying, there's a lot of shared commitment, there's a lot of shared values, and the ageism is a barrier toward creating opportunities for collaboration and innovation and creativity. And by the way, did I mention that AI, artificial intelligence, is going to be wielding a bigger impact on our workplace in the years to come? So this panel is going to clarify everything for us. I'm really very excited about it. And again, in the interest of time, this is just the bare bones introduction. And you have more information about their careers and accomplishments. But on my far left is Emma Waldman, editor at the Harvard Business Review. Gary Officer is founder and CEO at CWI Labs. It's an organization that champions ways to bring about an innovative and inclusive workplace. And Alex Swartsel is managing director, Insights at Jobs for the Future, a national nonprofit that focuses on transforming U.S. education and workforce systems, again, for a more inclusive and equitable world. So to start off, I want to ask you all sort of the same question. I'll start down at the far left, Emma, with you. But I want you to react to the title of our discussion, 5 generations in the workplace. We know there's ageism, it's real, but there are 5 generations in the workplace. When you learned that this was going to be the topic of discussion, how did you think about, how would you like to frame that conversation?
I think it's important to note that we all work in very different ways, and we all entered the workforce during different time periods under different circumstances that are very much out of our control. And it's important to note that there is not one correct way to work. We all have our own communication preferences, values, drivers, motivators, and goals at work. And the challenge when you bring 5 generations working together, 5 groups of people who all like to work in very different ways, is to remember there's not just one way to do something. And learning to work together is a lifelong journey. And we all, it does take a bit of humility to meet each other halfway and get to know each other on personal levels and sort of say, how do you like to work? I grew up online, but I see the internet as a third parent. So for me, I'm very, I'm tech savvy, I'm efficient. But, when I'm talking to, similar to what Pooja said before, when I'm talking to my dad, who's been in the workplace, shout out to my dad who's watching, and a Stanford grad. When when I'm talking to my dad, who's been in the workforce for decades, he really values interpersonal communication because it's all about face-to-face client relationships. And so where I'm emailing and sending quick and efficient messages, he's saying, well, why aren't you calling me? And we just have different end goals, different motivators, and we have a lot to learn from each other. So maybe, yes, I could stereotypically teach him about technology, but on the other hand, he could teach me something about getting on the phone and talking to someone face to face. So I think it just goes to say there is a lot that we can learn from each other.
Yeah, I only learned a few years ago that my kids finally, who are, in their 30s, finally told me, Dad, we never listened to your voicemails. If you want to reach us, text us. Gary?
Thank you. Before I respond to the question, this is sort of the 5 generations or the 6 generations of Americans in the workforce played out today, because I know her dad. In the prep call, she said, "Are you Gary Officer? My dad knows you." And so it's acting out, right? I've known Bob for several decades, and it's great to see Emma in her current role. So that's a good question. We all are on this journey for different reasons. But the reasons are often defined by our own purpose, how we want to contribute to our families, our community, society at large. And in the context of the US, work has an additional meaning, an additional value. So my British friends, for them, work is a means to an end. In the US, for many, work is an addiction. So friend calls Gary, Gaza, how are you? I'm doing fine, work, Gary. I didn't call to ask about your work. I want to know how you are doing. And so work has a different meaning here. I think the story I'll tell, as I told earlier in another conversation, is the story of the US Olympic basketball team. And I wrote a blog recently that described how this team of wily veterans and rookies won a gold medal in Paris, right? The 3 leading players on that team in the final 5 minutes were Steph Curry, LeBron James, and Kevin Durant. All the other rookies and emerging talents who won MVPs in regular season, they were on the bench. Because those 3 veterans have been there before. And being on that squad has taught a valuable experience to the squad members about what's to come the next go around. So I think the importance of having team members who comprise different generations, all of whom bring different qualities to the team and to the efforts towards the result, that's very important. And it works in a sporting field. It also occurs in regular life in corporate America and nonprofits.
Alex?
Those are both really beautiful answers. And I want to add to it just by tweaking the frame a little bit, because the subtext when we talk about 5 generations in the workplace is that we're talking about 5 generations of human workers. So I come at this from the perspective of thinking about emerging technology and the role that artificial intelligence will play. And so I think this matters here for 2 reasons. One is because when we're showing up in the workplace, just as both Emma and Gary said, we're bringing our own ways of working and needs to that workplace that are allowing our organization or our collective work to accomplish things in better ways. It's a truism that diversity of all kinds in the workplace is a powerful thing, can generate extraordinarily powerful business outcomes, and age is no different. That's a component of diversity. But the other question, of course, that every organization in which we all work, or even for those of us who are solopreneurs or building businesses ourselves, we're doing that most likely because there's some human need that we're trying to meet, some human or societal or business need. And so as we start to work more and more closely in tandem with technology, for us to be able to have all of these generations working together in the workplace, I think shines a stronger spotlight on what are the needs of the human the human population, which is not only an extraordinary business opportunity, as a lot of the companies in this room I know are already thinking about, but as the needs of those generations change and we are trying to put together a collaborative set of solutions that bring to bear the strengths and qualities of both humans and machines, we need to know what the humans need. And having a representation of all humans of all generations, as well as all other markers of identity in the workplace, is going to help us think and act in a more cohesive way towards what our shared and very different and unique needs might be that can be met through collective effort in organizations.
And you mentioned technology, Emma, you mentioned technology, Alex, and one of the things that seems pervasive in the workplace still today is that as you get older, you lose touch with technology. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. And yet, if you think about a lot of the people in this room, or just talking about myself, my first office job was an IBM Selectric. And then we went to dedicated word processors, and then it was PCs, and now it's laptops and all other kinds of things, and phones. And for marketplace now, the phone is now a good enough microphone to be your backup when you're doing interviews. So there's just stereotypes that are so persistent, and they seem to live, even though if you went around and talked to people, you'd find out that people have adjusted to technology all the time. And Emma?
I think, yeah, when we fundamentally can't relate to someone because of age gaps, we often resort to using harmful stereotypes like snowflake or okay boomer, and we blame solvable problems on each other instead of working to understand the differences that distance us. We create these stereotypes, these subgroups of people because we think that it helps us learn about them faster. But in reality, like no one person falls into one group. We had an intern recently, and we sort of said, hey, you know what? Can you teach us about podcasts? Like, what are your favorite podcasts? You like podcasts, right? And they were like, I don't listen to podcasts. And that's a stereotype, and it kind of cuts both ways. Whereas I have colleagues who are older than me who are using technologies that are vastly beyond my understanding. And so resorting to these stereotypes, it's really just sort of a lazy option, when in reality, what you should be doing is sitting down and talking to each other and saying, what do you like to do? What are you good at? What do you want to learn about? Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? And how can we help each other and kind of take age off the table?
And what is the point of this technology? I think a lot of times in these spaces, we valorize the new thing. AI is the new thing. That we've done some work in virtual reality. The VR glasses are the new thing. And technology by itself is meaningless. The point of technology is that it allows us to accomplish some shared goal. And therefore, when you think about digital transformation or the adoption of technology, the questions number 1 through 10 that you have to answer is why. Why are we using this? Why does it matter? Why is it going to help your life, your working life, become easier, faster, more deeply connected to others, for instance? I was really struck in thinking about this panel by some of the data that came out in a report last fall from our friends at the SCAN Foundation and Generation, which looked into attitudes and perceptions of older workers as well as hiring managers across the world. And it found that of older workers, and I think they were counting 45 and older, sort of older and mid-career workers who were using artificial intelligence, usually generative AI tools of some kind, half of them were power users. They were using them daily or a few times a week. So, it starts again underneath this misperception that older workers do not adopt technology. I think when people have a reason to adopt a particular tool that allows them to do something that they want to do in a way that works better for them, then of course people will adopt technology. But you need to get underneath the why, which may also be different for all of us.
Here?
If I could add I have a 2-part response. I'll try and be as tight as possible.
Okay.
So on the one side, you have the issue of using an ism to find ways to exclude, right? So we hear about technology and healthcare costs as drivers for why we should go younger and not retain older talent in the workforce. And every data point I've seen suggests that the healthcare cost issue, as well as the ability of older workers to function at the level of their peers using modern technology, is no different. It's when they exit the workforce and try to come back that technology goes ahead of them. So that's just two isms that have been used to justify a certain outcome. But the issue is far more layered than technology. So in the back of this room is a gentleman, Raymond Jetson. He's written a book called Aging While Black, and it tells the story of the unique experiences of the African American community and how aging has informed certain outcomes that could have been avoided. And when I look at other groups, and I was in California yesterday meeting with a think tank group about workforce issues, we talked about what it means to age in the state and how occupations inform outcomes. And I was told that one of the leading occupations for African American in this state is a security guard. One of the leading occupations for a Latino is a janitor and a cook and a dishwasher. So these are isms that adds layers of complexity to an issue that I think we have to untangle. That's one. And three, very quickly. Our lack of our inability to speak beyond our own bubble, I think, is a major impediment to our ability to move the needle. When I talk to big foundation heads about the workforce experiences of older Americans, they're like, you're the first guy I've seen here discuss it the way you have. You guys don't show up. We have to show up. We have to tell the story of the vulnerable, of folks who have experiences that have resulted in them having to exit the workforce and carry the burden of their families when they return into the workforce with less income. So I think that's part of the complexity that we have to acknowledge. It's class, it's occupational segregation, there's racial dynamics, and there's the misperception and justification for certain deficiencies in the workforce that result in us excluding certain groups.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of this, in the background, just with what you described, and I'll start with you, Alex.
Sure.
We now have artificial intelligence moving in and can make a very compelling scenario where what Gary has just described with the three isms could get much, much worse and could actually push the generations farther apart. So with technology, with artificial intelligence, what is the promise of using artificial intelligence to actually bridge the gaps between the generations in the workplace?
That's a small question.
Exactly.
I think so. No one right answer, but one thing that's especially compelling to me is that I think the adoption of these tools will, to the extent that they're just part of the water, right? We're not even going to call them AI anymore. It's just going to be the way that we work. But I think that it will push us to a deeper understanding of two things. One is the value of domain knowledge and expertise within whatever field that we're in. And the second is the importance of human skills. We used to call them soft skills, durable skills, pick your adjective, but the skill set around how we connect with one another as human beings. And the reason for that is that we know that especially generative AI tools are very, very good at cognitive analysis. They're good at brainstorming. They can generate ideas and so forth. But to be able to evaluate their outputs effectively, you need to know what you're talking about and the problem that you're trying to solve. Or else, you can potentially be distracted by a hallucination or something to that effect. And so while a lot of the early research suggests that the benefits of using AI technology, for instance, in consulting settings, will redound to the benefit of earlier career workers who are using the tools to get themselves more up to speed, on par with workers that have more experience. I think it also helps us understand what is the more experience that we need to identify that is of value in the workplace. And where does that come from? Does it come from aggregated data that maybe an AI tool can do a better job of analyzing over time? Does it come from just the reps you know, the number of times that you as a worker or an employer, manager, or whatever, have seen the same circumstance over and over in working with other people or organizations. And so you have a sense of what the right way to navigate a given scenario is. How do we bottle that? You know, how is that reducible to data, and how much of that then becomes about human judgment? And to the point that I made earlier, where we're all in this to try to figure out how we meet our own needs and the needs of our society, you know, to be able to create work, you know, if these tools are taking on routine tasks, in some cases very sophisticated tasks that we had to devote human labor to address because there was no other way to do it. You know, the promise is that it's now freed up, you know, human time is freed up to do more creative or more exciting things. And so we need all of us of all ages to decide what that work should be and how we need to work together to accomplish it. And I think that especially as we get a deeper understanding of those two skills, the skill set of human connection and collaboration and the meaning of domain expertise, that together will allow us to ask much bigger and different questions about how we address climate change, about even how we address ageism, for instance.
Gary?
I think as I'm trying to sort of construct a response, I think the gatekeepers of opportunities reside in human beings. All right. I've run organizations where I have monitored the hiring practices of my younger employees, and they would invariably hire someone who are a 5-year younger version of themselves. And I'm asking the question of HR, I always do this, by the way. When I see patterns developing around the organization, I call HR, what's happening here? Why are we hiring the same people, same background, same school, same interest? And I was seeing a diverse pool that's given a fair shot. So I would see these patterns where folks were hiring themselves. When I look at the jobs numbers for December, it reads, the labor force participation rate for Americans who are 55 and over is 38.3%. The long-term unemployment rate for Americans 55 and over is 21.8%. Our own survey at CWI Labs revealed that almost 80% of older job seekers do not have a favorable optimism about landing a job within 6 months. Right? So we're talking about AI, we're talking about technology, but the gatekeepers of opportunity still resides with human beings. And that's where age discrimination kicks in. That's where we demerit people as they age. And if they are excluded, they become more vulnerable and they become more fearful. And it leads to the kind of cultural shifts that we are currently undertaking. No political statements from me today.
Okay. Well, I have a follow-up question. You would have Emma.
I use AI a bit differently, sort of in two ways when it comes to age. One of those is that I really see AI as a co-thinker to help me work through problems. You know, if I am at work and there is something I'm not understanding with a colleague older than myself or younger than myself, a lot of times I'll explain this miscommunication to AI, and I'll say, you know, what do you think I should do? What do you think, what's going on here? And AI will offer relatively useful tips to say, you know what, perhaps this person is just trying to, you know, prove themselves. And that's why they're speaking up over you in a meeting. Or, you know, perhaps X, Y, and Z, different perspectives. And then that sort of helps me frame a dialogue to have with that person. And I'll say, can you outline a dialogue that I can have with this person that will sort of tackle this miscommunication head on? And it is just a nice tool to have when you're working on framing up a conversation before you have it in person. And the other way that we like to use it is kind of for reskilling and upskilling, and sort of to what Gary was saying, you know, oftentimes when you feel workers are siloed in a job, or, you know, they're sort of, you have younger workers who are eager to climb the ladder at work versus older workers who feel like they're being forced into retirement because they've hit their tipping point and they can't go any further. there are ways to prevent that because no one is winning in this situation. Older workers and younger workers alike. The organization isn't serving anyone if workers aren't getting their needs met. And so I like to use AI and say, how would you reskill this position? How would you upskill this position? How might we reorganize the organization to make sure that our younger workers are being promoted and they're getting their long-term goals met while our older workers are still being challenged in their day-to-day work and aren't feeling like they need to retire tomorrow. They don't want to leave the workforce and they shouldn't have to because of their age. And so I kind of just use it as a tool to help me brainstorm and think. And then if any of those, if it presents with viable options, then you take that offline and you have conversations with people in real life and kind of see if any of them stick.
So I want to get to audience questions. So very quickly, one thing that organizations can do to promote collaboration, take advantage of 5 or 6 generations in the workplace. Emma?
I think that fostering mentorship programs is a wonderful way to do that. They have reverse mentorship programs where someone younger is paired with someone older, and you just kind of go out to lunch and you talk and you say, what do you do day to day? How do you work? How do you prefer to communicate? What tools do you like to use? Where are your strengths? Where do you think you can learn? I think getting to know each other on an interpersonal level is the most valuable thing you can do when you're bridging generations. And then you keep, I think there are a lot of misconceptions, but also not, that younger people come into the workforce and, we're very proactive and they do say, Gen Z millennials are like one of the more, like, they're highly educated, highly motivated because they grew up online. And sometimes they come to work with that arrogance. But then, you have your older generations who have been doing this for so long and who are the experts and have all this wisdom and knowledge to pass down. And ultimately, the two can learn so much from each other.
Yes.
Gary?
I agree with Emma. I've experienced organizations that had a tremendous cadre of very smart, very tech savvy, very high energy younger employees that's drove us forward. But then I had a Miss Yvonne, older person on my staff. Whenever these young staffers had a crisis or couldn't figure out something, Miss Yvonne's door was shut. They were talking to her. AI cannot replace our ability to engage with each other, right? Where Miss Yvonne was saying, I think you may be off on that one. Have you thought about it this way? Maybe what you said in that meeting was a little bit inappropriate. Have you thought about trying it this way? And Miss Yvonne today is still the mother to all these young staff of 15 years ago, because she gave them something in the workforce they had never had before. She gave them her time. She shared her wisdom, and she gave them their support. So I think the two younger employees, older, wily veteran, the Steph Curry moment, right?
Yeah.
And Anthony Edwards too. I think that's the analogy I think works in the workforce very well.
Alex?
Yeah, I think ask them, what is something that you want to understand or to get to know more about your colleagues in a different generation? What do you want them to know or understand about you? Because we all know people are seeking purpose and agency at work. But as people, I think we're seeking to be seen and understood. And we're all people at work. We don't become robots when we show up at the office. We bring our whole selves. And so the more we can understand what our workforces need just by asking them, we can construct some of the kinds of opportunities that Emma and Gary were just talking about in a way that's really authentic.
And I'd like to open up for questions. And does anybody have any questions want to ask? Or I'll keep.
We have one question online that comes.
Thank you.
We've had a lot of interesting discussion here around the notion of labeling generations, especially in the context of work. And is there a benefit to foregoing labels such as Gen Z, millennial, and just focus on what each person can bring with and without regards to their age, and how can employers move towards this future?
That's a really good question about, are we, we use generations a lot, but they're kind of made up. They are made up, and it's very much a artificial construct. So Emma?
I mean, yeah, I think there's absolutely benefits. Just as you wouldn't discriminate against someone based on the color of their skin or their gender or their religion, you shouldn't discriminate based on something else out of their control, their age. And you wouldn't, say, all right, can all women come over here, please? You wouldn't say, so yeah, I think that, we're all just people, and we don't all just ascribe to one group that might, be determine, when we were born. So I think, yeah, we should be labeled based on, use our names. Don't say, oh, there's the Gen Z girl. Say, oh, there's Emma.
Great.
Repeat the question, please.
So it's about, should we be using labels like Gen Z and boomers? Should we use this generational lens to be looking at the workplace?
That's a tough one. I think we have to recognize that the workplace has 6 generations of personalities. If I'm answering the question correctly, that we somehow have to find a way of melding together in ways that will support the outcomes of an organization and their goals. But it's real, and we have to recognize it.
I think the only thing that I would add is that we've seen a lot of organizations use employee resource groups or more sort of homogenous spaces for people to connect with one another within lines like markers of identity, as a way of building community and also as a way of drawing connections within and among other groups. And that's something that, I think is always worth considering where it's appropriate in the context of the workplace. But it is tricky given the blurry lines of the generations.
Over here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for a wonderful panel. My name is Lynn. I'm a fellow with the World Economic Forum on the longevity economy, as well as a consultant with Mercer. And so this work that you're doing, talking about multi-generational workforces, is very much in line with the work that I'm very passionate about, and also the way that we support our clients as well. My question is related to, especially as I'm thinking about a multi-generational workforce, we're seeing now a rise. I think the age 75 plus demographic is the fastest growing demographic in the labor force, and age 65 plus is projected to be about 8.6% of the labor force by 2032. In some of the surveys that we've run, we've noticed that even though organizations say that they serve employees of all life stages, less than half of them actually consider age as part of their DEI criteria. And so my question to you all is, as we're thinking about this multi-generational workplace, and as people now are choosing to think through life in maybe more of a multi-stage way, coming in and out of the workforce, and then maybe choosing to work for longer, I'm wondering what you suggest for companies to do to adapt to enable people to be able to remain in the workplace for longer if that's their desire. As I imagine that someone age 75 plus, for example, may not be looking to engage in the workforce in the same way as somebody just entering right from college. So we'll just love your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And we'll start with Alex and then move down.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing a lot. I love that question. I think we're seeing a lot of really interesting experimentation around job design and structure. So coming back to eras of job shares, for instance, where multiple people can hold the same roles, more flexibility in terms of hours. Obviously, the pandemic and the rise in remote work is making knowledge work much more accessible. So I think that some of the same themes that have been coming up this morning about just understanding what your workers, your employees need to show up at their best, and thinking more about what people from all generations can bring in terms of the value that they add to the organization, which in some ways might be somewhat unique, I think is really powerful. The idea of creating roles, for instance, for more experienced workers who may not necessarily be looking for a 9 to 5, 40-hour-a-week kind of a job, but who want to show up as mentors to younger or earlier career colleagues, is a really great structure. So I think there's a lot of, and as we move closer and closer to technology adoption in a more widespread way, I think we're going to be forced to answer these kinds of questions, as well as thinking about how modular work, project-based work, people's side gigs as more and more people are starting businesses as a way of building wealth and creating opportunity, how that fits in or alongside traditional work. We're going to see sort of the traditional structures of work really blow up. That's already happening, and there's going to be more of that in the coming years. I think that redounds extraordinarily to the benefit of older workers, but employers have got to meet them where they are because there's value there, you know.
I didn't hear the question.
I think it's a case by case basis depending on the worker. And some workers are going to want to serve as mentors. Some workers are not. Some workers are going to want to be reskilled or upskilled or learned new things to further their current role, and some aren't. And that's really on the manager and the leadership to work with their independent employees to make sure that everyone is having their goals met. Because no one worker is the same. No one is going to want the exact same thing as their next colleague. And so it's really going to take an independent look at each worker's long-term plans to make sure that they're happy long-term.
And let's see, last question. You had the last question, and we've kind of run out of time, but we're still going to take it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the very interesting panel. I come from academia, and I realized that one of the issues why multi-generation at work is complicated is that really there's not many places where multi-generation takes place. So universities are, on the one hand, a place where you have younger people and older people, like professors and students, but there should be, I think, more. So there should be more multi-generation at university level. And we should think of other places where we have more multi-generation relationship happening. Because if the workplace is the only place, so what I have in mind is that people experience multi-generation at home with the family, the grandparents, as was mentioned earlier, a little bit at university, and then suddenly they arrive to work and they really have all those multiple generation. And nothing really prepares them for that. So, I want to hear your perspective on where else and how else could we prepare better for multi-generation at work?
Who'd like to take that one?
I can jump in quickly, just that community settings. I sing in a 150 voice symphonic chorus in Washington, DC, that has people in their early, 20s and people in their 80s. And there are extraordinary relationships that have come out of that. I personally, this time this morning is making me think about the fact that I've done a better job of connecting with people in that group who are younger than me than the people who are, then older than I am. But those kinds of shared, collective experiences that are grounded in community that help people connect to one another and network can be extraordinary opportunities outside of the workplace.
Gary?
No, I thoroughly agree. I am of a generation that engage with people on a personal basis. I found enormous value in listening to my elders when I was younger. I found mentors who paved the way for me, informed by their experiences, and gave me clues as to what I could do as I think about my life's journey. The workforce is also very similar. You learn from people by being in their space. I think for the younger generation, it's mostly technology-based platforms from which they acquire information and how they communicate. So I hate texting. I want to see you and talk to you, but my thumb gets numb texting because younger people want to text, not talk. So it's going back. I don't appear to be a Luddite, but I think there's something to be said about how we engage with one another that's becoming less current because technology has taken over so many aspects of our lives. And those patterns, I think, find themselves in our workforce as well.
And Emma?
We're all here today because we want to learn something. And fortunately, learning is a lifelong journey. And no matter your age or how skilled you are at your job, there is always something new to learn. So I challenge each and every one of you to have a conversation with someone much older or younger than yourself and try to pinpoint opportunities where you can learn from this person. It might be something irrelevant to what you do at work. It can literally be anything: skateboarding, cooking, technology, interpersonal communication, chess. We're here at Stanford, tennis. So just try and find a way to learn something from each other, because open-mindedness and a bit of humility are key to realizing the benefits and the power of a generationally diverse workforce.
10 seconds. So I did not state the correct title of Mr. Jetson's book. It's called Aging While Black, a radical reimagining of aging and race in America. And the point I was making at the time was to understand America in all of its complexities.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much. We could keep going, but I don't think the organizers would approve. So thank you.